John, you want to do the welcome?
Yes, well, welcome everybody to the European Connected TV Initiative's Grand Report Unveiling. This has been a lengthy effort that we will give you some background on in a moment, but we're delighted to have a fantastic turnout for today's discussion to talk about some of our findings, where this ecosystem has got to and where it might be going. So to take us through the background to the project, I'm going to hand over to my esteemed colleague, Marianne Halford, who'll just give us some of the background to the initiative, and then we'll talk through some of the findings from the research.
Great. Thank you, John. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you all here today. We're really excited about the launch of this paper. It's been a long journey, and we're excited to be at this connection point today. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to give you an overview of the European CTV initiative. We're going to provide perspectives on the European CTV market. And then we're going to have two robust panel discussions talking about, and actually on the perspectives on the European CTV market, we're going to get those from our esteemed colleagues and sponsors from Roku, FinCons, and IP on Web. We have executives from all those companies on board. And then we have two great panel discussions with industry experts. One is going to be about unlocking the potential of CTV in Europe, and the other will be on the need for industry collaboration. So let us step back to the beginning of the European CTV initiative. We embarked on this journey with a major principal question: what are the practical steps that the industry needs to take to unlock the full potential of the CTV advertising ecosystem in Europe? And we worked on that journey again with FinCons, IP on Web, and Roku. But more importantly, we wound up talking to over 500 senior executives across Europe and the United States. Themes and topics that we discussed was the CTV opportunity, the US versus Europe, measurement, targeting and attribution, addressable advertising, streaming services, and programmatic ecosystem. We actually had dedicated webinars to those particular topics. Then we had in-country seminars, 2 for each country. We looked at 5 countries in specific: France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. And we'll provide an overview of some of the initial findings today. And then you can see on the right just the plethora of companies that were helpful and supportive to us throughout this entire journey. And we're very appreciative of all of their participation. Before we go into some of the findings, it is also important that we level set what the definition of connected TV is. Connected television is an internet connected TV, providing access to content delivery online, as well as in general channels and services delivered via terrestrial broadcasting or a TV platform. We show some examples down below. We have smart TVs, we have HBB TV-enabled smart TVs, and then we have streaming devices. In fact, one of our sponsors provides those streaming devices, Roku. CTVs are not a class of video inventory, but they facilitate access to a wide range of streaming services. And those include BVOD, which is very popular with all of the major European broadcasters. When I say this term to Americans, they very rarely know what BVOD means, but I know everybody in Europe does. It is broadcasting video on demand. And there's some great robust services that a number of the broadcasters throughout Europe have built and developed. There's AVOD services, whether or not it's Rakuten or the Roku channel or YouTube. And then, of course, there are the big SVODs, and then there are other offerings. So, John, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. If we can jump to the next slide. So the US was our benchmark. The US CTV advertising ecosystem, I think, as everyone knows, has developed very, very rapidly in recent years and is still developing quickly, with new entrants such as Comcast coming into the market only last year. If we can go back a slide, Marianne, thank you. What has driven its development? Well, I think from our research, our hypothesis is that there are 5 significant factors that have really driven development. One is scale. So it's clearly the case that the US is the largest CTV market in the world in a broadly contiguous market. Large addressable base, a relatively easy and straightforward way for companies to access literally millions of TV households across the country, with market leaders like Roku facilitating access to a lot of different households. It's a competitive ecosystem. So we have a wide range of well-funded OEMs who've been able to build advertising businesses. And that is stimulating innovation as these companies compete to deliver great advertising experiences. At the same time, as everybody knows, the pay TV industry in the US has faced challenges. Broadband, which is one of the main services for the cable businesses, is still very robust, but the traditional pay TV packages have been declining with significant losses. And that has fueled the growth of viewing on CTVs, of streaming services, both SVOD and AVOD, MVPD offerings or virtual MVPD offerings and others. Another important distinguishing factor in the US is that CTV inventory or rights to CTV inventory are widely distributed. So lots of different companies have access to inventory and they're able to use that plus data and the platforms they've built out to facilitate access. That has created a really competitive ecosystem, coupled with the fact that these companies have both the means and the incentives to invest, they can actually generate a return. Next slide, please. So given those advantages that the US has enjoyed, CTVs are presenting a really interesting range of opportunities for the advertising ecosystem. And there are 5 that we really spent our time zooming in on. The first is that they're a scale distribution platform. Put very simply, barriers to entry into the TV market have come dramatically down. App stores are becoming more standardized, but they are a very straightforward way for companies to provide video services to these households. Obviously, search and discoverability are still challenges, but we're seeing significant improvements in that space as well. Secondly, data. CTVs are a significant source of data about viewing when coupled with ACR capabilities and other things. They provide very granular, detailed access to second by second viewing of both content and ads. And most big measurement providers now are obviously incorporating CTV data as one of the various data sources they use to deliver next generation measurement services. If we could, we just go back. Sorry, Marianne, if we can just go back to the slide.
All right.
Third, just the previous one.
Yep.
Third, can we go back into screen mode?
Yes, I will. Hold on.
Third, they are a platform for addressable TV and video advertising. So there are various different routes, of course, being offered. The most obvious is server-side ad insertion on IP streams when these are being consumed. But you also have very encouraging initiatives like Project OR, which offer linear broadcast overlays with client-side storage. Fourth, we've got development of the programmatic ecosystem. So the major trading environments like the Trade Desk and Magnite have all doubled down on the CTV space, which is creating a fertile new environment for monetizing video inventory. Streaming services like Philo rely almost entirely on 30 platforms for monetization. And again, this lowers barriers to entry. They've not had to build out national ad sales teams. And then lastly, CTVs are a platform for advertising innovation. They allow for the first time controlled experiments, and they also stimulate and support new formats. And we'll talk a bit about those in relation to HBB TV shortly. So summing up, we think CTVs have the capability to be a critical platform for growth and innovation in the market. Europe, if we jump to the next slide, is very different, however. So the first obvious observation is that the scale of CTV in many European markets has been much more limited. In some markets like the Netherlands, this is because of a very strong pay TV presence. So most consumers in the Netherlands spend most of their time interacting with the interfaces on their set-top boxes rather than with their CTV. And that has been a barrier. It restricts viewing and ultimately the supply of inventory. Second, the supply of premium CTV video inventory outside of the major TV sales houses has tended to be very limited. Put simply, the streamers have much less volume. So when, for example, we look at, say, Barb data, which ranks the top 100 program events, say, in a given month, we see that broadcasters still have a very strong position. So a lot of the CTV viewing is fragmented, it's long tail inventory. Third, there are data issues. At this point, I don't believe that there's any JIC in Europe which is actively using data from a CTV platform to support its measurement offering. We're going to hear a bit more about that later. We have Paul Good from Comscore who'll talk to us, but the usage of CTV data is much more limited. Fourth, many of the broadcasters we engaged with during the course of the project voiced significant concerns about the supply chain, the ad tech supply chain. They have concerns about OEMs, they have concerns about DSPs. We think this is changing, as I'll come on to in a moment, but it has slowed down developments. And indeed, commercial relationships between OEMs who are driving the market in many respects and the wider industry have taken real time to develop. We are seeing a CTV ecosystem developing, but it's going to be very different. However, the signs are encouraging. If we can go to the next slide. So the positive news, however, is that in the last 6 months, we've really seen developments in the European market start to accelerate. We've seen encouraging signs of new partnerships between broadcasters and OEMs in multiple geographies. We've seen streaming services continue to gain traction with major new launches from both big US companies or revised strategies from major European players helping to grow scale. HBB TV has continued to scale up, and we've seen encouraging signs of the first collaborations to drive the rollout of HBB TV TA, the targeted advertising spec, notably in Germany. We've also seen some important developments with the data ecosystem. So Europe is clearly going to have its own connected ecosystem of platforms, which will be complex and very different. Standards and interoperability are going to be critical, but it is developing only in a very different way. Let's talk about some of those differences.
So each country is very different, particularly when you look at markets like Germany and Italy, where HBB TV has become a very popular standard. In fact, over a majority of the television sets in Germany are HBB TV enabled. John already referenced some of the initiatives that are taking place in that market. Italy has also has growing HBB TV population and is doing a lot of experimentation, much of it led by Publi Italia, in partnership with our sponsor FinCons, working in that regard. Then you have a market like the Netherlands, where virtually everybody has pay TV, and there is very minimal innovation at this point in time. While most of the television sets being sold in the market today are CTVs, largely there has not been a CTV ecosystem that is evolving. Markets like France and UK are somewhat different, and both are taking unique approaches to the market. Obviously, the UK has been one of the great leaders in advanced television advertising, spearheaded largely by Sky, but we've also seen some tremendous work on the part of the broadcasters with the launch of their BVOD services and the monetization thereof. We have ITV. In fact, we have a leader from ITV joining us for the panel discussion later on, has been very assertive in terms of leveraging the capabilities of connected TV, most notably through Planet V. And now they're going to become even more innovative with the launch of ITVX, which was announced last week. In France, much of the landscape is controlled by the ISPs, who have various relationships with the various broadcasters as it relates to the sharing of data and supporting them in the selling of targeted advertising. Yet at the same time, the telcos in that market have restrictions about the ability for the broadcasters to be able to leverage smart TVs for the distribution of their own SVOD applications. So in the report, we go into a lot of details about many of the nuances of these markets. But as John just said, it's a very it's a checkerboard in many respects. And, you know, for me as an American, it was fascinating to learn and delve into a lot of the very interesting things going on in each of these markets.
So during the course of our work, we spent a lot of time talking to the nearly 500 executives who participated in the project about what they felt were the opportunities for further progress. If there are priorities that the industry should lean into, what would those priorities be? One big takeaway we found is that dialogue between the two different advertising ecosystems, between the traditional broadcast-led environment and the online advertising segment, has been relatively limited. And indeed, many executives expressed to us a level of frustration that it's been so hard to have a constructive dialogue between the two sides of the equation, so to speak. However, there were four big opportunities that came out of the work we did in terms of areas that people felt further progress could be made in. So the first is the support for standards and arrangements that can simplify the delivery of addressable advertising at scale on CTV platforms. The most obvious example of this is HBB TV, which clearly is delivering significant benefits to broadcasters in markets like Germany and Italy who are able to leverage it. It has its challenges and issues. It's very different to a end-to-end managed pay TV platform like Sky's AdSmart, but nevertheless, it's a good solution for broadcasters who can make it work when there's enough scale to really deliver it. Second was standardization in the programmatic ecosystem. Many industry participants talked about, can we go back to the?
Yeah, sorry, John, sorry.
Many industry participants complained to us that the ecosystem is quite varied at the moment. There are notable gaps, in particular between some of the private marketplaces and ad tech stacks being rolled out by individual broadcasters and between the wider ecosystem. There's not enough interoperability, and there could be efforts to standardize in that space. Third, measurement is still a problem. Many companies said to us that definitions are problematic. We don't yet have good definitions in many markets of what a view consists of. We also, we can just go back. Thank you. We also found that many industry participants felt that there wasn't yet a roadmap for incorporating CTV data comprehensive into measurement. And indeed, there are questions about the rationale for doing it. Is it needed? And then finally, we had many comments about the advertising supply chain. CTVs create tremendous opportunities to leverage data to support the advertising experience, but at the moment, there's not enough transparency. And in some cases, we've heard problems with fraud are not yet fully appreciated, fraud and viewability. So those are four areas we felt provided some scope for improvement. Lastly, we felt there could well be a case for some kind of neutral forum, bringing together industry leaders and trade bodies for regular cross-industry dialogue about this ecosystem. CTVs are clearly going to be a big part of the future of Europe's TV market, defined broadly. There isn't really yet a single body that brings all the key stakeholders from the two ecosystems together for regular discussion about how to make that market work better. Perhaps that's something we'll come onto into our final panel. Right, Marianne, over to you for our first panel discussion. Our first contributors, I should say, sorry.
Yes, our first contributors, and apologies for some of the technical mishaps. I'm trying to juggle emails, text messages, and other things all at once. So, so I am very happy to introduce our three sponsors, each of whom are going to provide their own perspectives on the evolution of the CTV market in Europe. And we will start off with Mike Shaw.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Thank you, John. So very quick introduction, people. I lead the international advertising business for Roku from our London office. Roku, for those of you who may not be familiar with this already, is the streaming platform from which around 60 million households and growing globally get their television. And we're growing in Europe, especially with launches a couple of years ago in the UK and more recently in Germany that are already now live. So first off, a big thanks to our host, to John and to Marianne, for all of the work that have gone on so far. Roku is very pleased to have been part of the effort sponsoring this work, this development, and to be part of that project team synthesizing all of the thinking across our industry. When you do get an opportunity to read the report, I highly recommend just having a quick look at page 5. It is quite some achievement to manage to solicit the input of so many experts and veterans across the buy side, broadcasters and content providers, tech players, measurement and industry bodies. So John, Marianne, really appreciate your input and all the hard work that's gone on over the last year plus on that. From the report that is being released today, there are 3 key things that I wanted to highlight as important, I think, to the industry, certainly to Roku. Firstly, it's the magnitude of the European opportunity. John's touched on that. We'll go a little bit more into that. Secondly, it's around the workflow challenge. And finally, it's really around the measurement imperative. So in terms of the European opportunity, whilst cord cutting is a US expression, the shift to streaming of delivery of TV content is a global phenomenon. By 2020, Smart TV penetration was already averaging 50% across the 5 markets that we've studied and growing fast. It's very hard now to not find a smart television in the shops. The TV ad market in those 5 focus countries studied as part of this exercise was already over $20 billion cumulatively last year, and that doesn't include the digital display and video advertising markets that all form part of the addressable opportunity here. Consumer behavior is shifting fast, with smaller linear audiences overall and a growing proportion of viewers becoming either light or no linear in their consumption. But TV, in all of its forms, is in absolutely rude health, with total TV time, that view of all of the time people have spent watching video content on screens, increasing, and arguably we now have the best choice of premium content than has ever existed at any point during the history of the medium. Now, Europe can learn some of the lessons from the CTV ad market that John talked about, but the major differences, especially around the makeup of the content landscape and the providers of that premium content, mean that those revenue streams are likely to be divided very, very differently to maybe some of the precedents we've seen across the pond. On the workflow challenge, historically, I think it's really important to understand that TV has been a distinctly national endeavor. There have been different national systems for and processes for trading, campaign activation and measurement, and that the art of campaign strategy, audience planning and creative generally lives outside of this, but the media aspect is very much front and center of where new streaming focused workflows need to grow up very quickly. There will be quality-based media choices happening and context-based media choices happening, but the biggest opportunity for us here is really around the audience-based decisioning and how agencies can ensure that their advertisers' money is spent effectively in connected TV in the way that it's generated these incredible brand building results over the long term from its predecessor on linear TV. The pipes and processes of campaign workflow are not thrilling discussion topics. We are going to talk about them today, but they are in and of themselves part of media conferences. But they are vital because the ease of deployment of campaign management of overall frequencies, the deployment of campaigns themselves, control of the environment, compatibility with measurement requirements are table stakes in the world that TV has come from. And therefore, they need to be table stakes in the world that TV is going to as well. On the measurement imperative, it's the very first point of the report's recommendations for future industry development, those agreements on principles for measurement, and it's there for a reason. Whilst we may be moving in a cookieless direction, we're moving in exactly the opposite direction in terms of the volume of TV data and the opportunities that TV data has. And we need to use that wisely. The stark reality is that marketers will not start buying connected TV audiences at scale because they are the new shiny thing in the industry, but rather because they are robust and effective measurement frameworks in place to objectively quantify outcomes, whether those outcomes be geared around reach, resonance, or reaction. Roku, like others, is partnering with measurement leaders to provide solutions for clients' campaign requirements, but the comfort level that the TV industry on both buy and sell side had previously achieved remains elusive at this point in European connected TV development. So in closing, I trust that this work is a waypoint towards a bright future for connected TV advertising in Europe. I hope attendees find this afternoon's discussion and the report that come out of it very valuable, and I will hand you back to Marianne for the next speaker.
Okay, thank you so much, Mike, and thanks for all your support throughout this whole process. It's been really fabulous working with you. Oliver, buongiorno, my friend.
Good afternoon.
Okay, so I know that you have some slides. So I actually have your slides loaded into this presentation. So I will hopefully do a better job of navigating them than I did on some of the slides earlier. Okay, here we go.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon. I'm Oliver Botti, SVP Sales and Innovation at Fincons Group, and we'll use these next 5 minutes to share some of the latest experiences we had with European and US broadcasters, which are, in my opinion, innovating addressable TV advertising models on CTV. Please, next slide, Maria. And a few words about Fincons just to start. We are an international consulting and system integrator system integration company. 2,000 employees, 200 million euro revenues in 2021. Working with tier one broadcasters in both Europe and US, such as Sky at the group level, Mediaset and Rai in Italy, M6 and TF1 in France, ARD in Germany, RT in Ireland, and recently in the US also with Univision, Sinclair, CBS, EW Scripps. We cover the entire digital content supply chain with a special focus on OTT and hybrid next-gen TV, and in particular, addressable TV on connected TV. Please, next one.
Okay, and we look forward to seeing you talking to the US broadcasters at NAB in April.
Yeah, we are going to do that. And I think that the pioneer customer, which in our opinion is making addressable TV innovation pay, is Mediaset, which started in 2017 with its Publitalia sales house to introduce HbbTV-based monetization and user engagement features, moving from the initial interactive and addressable display advertising to dynamic advertising replacement, cross-channel advertising, retargeting, and attribution, up to the newest drive-to-store and drive-to-site models. But let's see more about this. Please, next one. Publitalia presentation, I'm using here from Publitalia presentation presented at the last HbbTV symposium in Paris. Let's see how they are now measuring significant results from the adoption of these new advertising paradigms running on CTVs. Addressable TV campaign allow Publitalia to add the advertising frequency and incremental reach to linear campaigns. So users which, for example, were not exposed to the linear advertising of a brand can be reached by a following retargeting also message via addressable online TV. While those who were not reached can be now be reached by new, for example, L-shaped banners during their preferred show. Next slide, please. And similar results can be also obtained in a cross-channel approach. So combining linear advertising on the TV, linear and non-linear on the TV, with non-linear ones on a second screen. Next slide, please. But I think that the most innovative results in this case also are already showing initial measurement of drive-to-store KPIs. Let's see what drive-to-store means. Drive-to-store means that there are enabling technologies.
Sorry.
Okay, yeah, thank you. The enabling technologies here are a combination of HbbTV data tracking capabilities, GDPR compliance, combined with the pairing of TV and mobile devices within the households, and also integrated with footfall technologies installed on mobile phones, which allow to monitor the user position on the territory. Comparing a group of users exposed to the TV advertising with a control group of not exposed ones, you see here some interesting measurement. For example, an 18% uplift in visiting the store was measured, happening within the next 7 days after the advertising exposure, and with an average of 56% of people who entered the store living at a distance of more than 10 kilometers from the store, which means that their visit was not by chance, but done on purpose, so driven by the advertising exposure. And similar encouraging KPIs are also measured by the drive-to-site campaigns, where similarly to the drive-to-store, the TV advertising can effectively bring the user to navigate the brand website. Next one, please. And this is regarding, can you switch the
Yeah, well, yeah.
Okay.
There we go.
This was for Europe, but let's see also an overview of what's happening in the US. This is a flash from the US where next-gen TV revolution, I would say, is accelerating the overall global market, helping to bring manufacturer on board and probably cables too. And here you see experiences with it developing ATSC3 applications for Univision, for example, enabling hyperlocal news in production already since 2020 and winning the NAB Product of the Year award. But also PBS WKAR, a remote schooling pilot leveraging ATSC3 data casting features, or CBS, where an interesting experiment of, I would say, TV-driven e-commerce was run, allowing a click and buy approach with both the remote controller and the Alexa voice control. Or Sinclair, which is already in its second wave of broadcaster app, where we have now introduced a new interactive user experience for this second wave, so more mature app. EW Scripps, an interesting news literacy project, is helping citizens to recognize and dismiss false news, leveraging TV interactivity and participation with quizzes, polls, and other tools. But also the NESN and several other Tier 1 broadcasters are now piloting sport gamification, contest, and betting. In general, all these are opportunities to enhance the user engagement, but also to create a new inventory spaces and monetization models. Next slide, please. And that's it. I hope it was useful to recap these successful examples within the current CTV global move. And please feel free to contact me for any further information you may need. We are really excited by the many new stimulus we receive every day from the CTV landscape.
Thank you so much, Oliver. And now we're going to hand it over to Brian Gilbert from IP on Web. And I'm going to stop sharing so Brian can do the share. So, okay, so Brian, I got to hand the sharing to you. Okay, you can do it now. Okay, go ahead. You should be fine, Brian, to share.
Okay, great. So thanks everybody, and thanks Marianne and John for getting us this far. So I'm going to look at this from a slightly different perspective, which is how to put in context all of the different things that we've heard and what the report covers. There's versions and each market is different in terms of what CTV is the future, and everybody's confident in that, but how do we get there? How does it become a significant part of advertising in each market? And one of the key takeaways from all of the work that was done as part of this initiative is that it's going to be up to each individual market to develop its own thing, but there's a need and a desire to have some common understanding. So this is an attempt to maybe have a useful way to look at the opportunity, which is looking at it as a first-party ecosystem, rather than simply siloed linear or something slightly different or digital. Again, is more of a mental framework than a literal implementation approach. So as streaming becomes increasingly dominant and viewers shift to those environments, the approach isn't tied to any one particular technology. As has been noted, HbbTV certainly has a lot of traction in some markets. It's ATSC 3.0 or Next Gen TV is coming in the US. So these are still evolving. But to think in terms of how media trading is evolving, how to unify this, how to address some of the workflow challenges, and how to realize the potential of the opportunity in each of the markets. So, a first-party environment is bringing together the content, the context, and audiences in an end-to-end manner. So it's not treating these as siloed things, and it's not trying to replace one with the other. These will all coexist in various forms. There's not going to be the end of one era and the beginning of the next era. It's going to be transitions at different paces and at different approaches in different times. So the focus is on interaction, monetization, and data that is derived from a direct relationship with consumers, and that allows advertisers to leverage their information that they have in their data. So one way to look at that is looking at the connections between and the uses of those interactions. So using data to drive shopping experiences, using data to drive programming, whether it's customized or simply localized, how to incorporate and work with the various participants on the buy side to give them reporting, to give them access to information to measure outcomes. And if you look at the evolution that's taking place in other areas of media trading in terms of mobile and display, each of those are evolving in a similar fashion. So, there's a strong likelihood that this will continue, and that if you can harmonize and bring that together, it'll help accelerate scale and reach and spend more quickly. But a key difference is that there's not a common set of identifiers or common set of trading. Each market is different. Some markets use fixed identifiers, some use dynamic identifiers. Others use things like phone numbers. So again, this has to be managed, and there's a shift in responsibility to getting traction in the market that doesn't rely on any one party to make this happen. So The roles of measurement and trading are equally important in any future ecosystem. They're just going to have to be approached differently. So there's opportunities that are common across these approaches. Automation is a key to solve for the problems of both the buyers and sellers. So packaging inventory into audiences, having analytics, having discovery of those audiences and that inventory. Segments look like it's going to depend on each of the markets. There has to be orchestration of this monetization, particularly around scale, and it needs to be coordinated. The data, due to regulations, particularly in Europe, but also due to technical reasons, such as not having, like, as I mentioned, shared identifiers, this is going to require additional work in data ownership and utilization to make those data assets and audience assets discoverable and tradable. And there needs additional work done to break down the disconnect that currently exists in the sideload approach, which is particularly important in a market or in markets that don't have the scale yet, but the work needs to be done. So it's an opportunity to learn and adapt and become more agile, and that opportunity can be leveraged not just for CTV, but for other forms of media trading. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brian. That was great. That was really terrific. So I will go back to sharing. Let me get to the presentation. Okay, here we go. And now we are ready for our first panel, but I want to do a little bit of a check here because I'm looking to make sure I have Jaideep is on. Is Reese? Oh, Reese is on. So we have all of our panelists are on. This is fantastic. So we are going to start off with a conversation here with Paul Good from ComScore, Jaideep Kakar from Pubmatic, Maria Myra, excuse me, I am doing very badly on the pronunciations, Maria Myra Asova from DCMN, and Reese McLaughlin from ITV. So I'm going to ask each panelist to briefly give a quick overview of what they are currently doing to help unlock the potential of CTV in Europe. Paul, you're first up, and I think you may have some slides to share as well.
Yeah, am I sharing or you're sharing?
No, I'm going to stop sharing so you can share. So I'm going to stop and then you can share.
Super. Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, so have we made any progress in CTV audience measurement? I've just got 2 to 3 minutes, so I'll flick through these. The first thing to say is that CTV measurement is not a simple or consistent set of data. We are getting data from content providers where their content or their ads have been tagged. We do have service providers who have their back-end logs of the services that they've delivered. We have ACR, so automatic content recognition, data from smart TVs or streaming devices that we're receiving. And of course, there's the traditional measurement of TV consumption via people meters in households. And there are pros and cons on this. I'm not going to run through them in detail given the time, but if I put this as a summary, we need to get to a complete view of the market in terms of bringing these silos of data together. We need to ensure that there's a common taxonomy to align them, consistency of what constitutes a metric and a view, because some of these have been measured internally. So we need to ensure that there's consistency in the metrics used. Then we need to deduplicate, because the same event could be measured by each one of those 4 methods, and we need to ensure that we're only registering that event once, even if we're picking it up, that signal from multiple sources. And ultimately, we need to move, since this is audience measurement, to a personification view as opposed to a household or a device view. This all needs to get done in a privacy-preserving manner, which presents its own challenges. And crucially, as far as the buy side is concerned, this needs to sit as part of the larger TV and digital ecosystem. as opposed to just another silo that they need to try and reconcile into their media plans and measurement. So what we're needing to, and there was talk earlier about different ID spaces used for the targeting. So for measurement, we're absolutely fine that there's different ID spaces on the delivery side. We need to bring, for both bringing digital and TV together, a common universe for measurement. So a single unified, what we call virtual ID space that represents the entire population. And the game that we're then playing is taking all the events in digital and in TV and trying to map them onto this virtual ID space in a probabilistic manner, not doing this in any deterministic way. So there's a method, and this is all following on the digital side, the World Federation of Advertisers, WFA approach that is currently being developed both with Project Origin in the UK and a POC that we're running with the ANA, the Advertiser Association in the US, that is mapping, that's building models to map digital events onto this virtual ID space. And that is on then looking at PC, mobile, and tablet. On the TV side, we are then looking at data feeds that are coming from set-top boxes, as well as from CTV from ACR and tagged and publisher data. That needs to be validated, normalized, and integrated. We're running a personification methodology on top of that, which I won't try and explain at this point, but you get to a large set in the millions of personified people that you can then fuse onto a single space. So it's then the ability for the buy side to understand what that deduplicated view is. So there is a lot of progress being made, but still a long way to go to have this as a standardized thing rolled out across multiple markets. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we will move next. Oh, hold on. Let me go back to my sharing the screen. So we go back. Jaidev, and you're up next, from Programmatic.
Cool. Hi, guys. I'm Jaidev. I just want to put a bit of a disclaimer in. If you do hear snoring, it's just my dog. He tends to snore on cue, but I'll get along with it and hopefully it won't disturb you all. The perspective of the current state of the CTV advertising ecosystem. So obviously Programmatic, us being a global SSP, we've got quite a unique position on this, and we're able to see a similar pattern of evolution. And we've seen this sort of pattern of behavior in the past from print to digital, and even from digital to programmatic, in that usually the buy side world kind of changes and the supply side world kind of changes, and it typically tends to start small in like a PG or an IO way. And we're sort of seeing this in parts of Europe, such as like Spain, France, whereby buyers would align themselves with the bigger brands. It's kind of like, nobody got fired for buying IBM. It's a well-known brand, everybody knows it, has scale, etc. In the UK market, we're sort of seeing the next stage of evolution developing, in that there's more data measurement and there's more questions being asked, and advertisers want justification on larger spends. And then finally, it kind of finishes at a more scaled and collaborative approach. That's definitely the state of play in the US market at the moment, where it's more, CTV is more being bought or starting to be bought in the open marketplace. It is interesting, or it will be interesting to see how EMEA develops, whether it follows down the US route, where there's probably about a top 2, maybe even top 500 channels that they can choose from, because there's so much content available in that market, or if it kind of goes down the APAC route, where CTV consumption in APAC is mainly on the smartphone itself as opposed to the large screen. And that smartphone starts to count as almost like an OTT device, where you can actually project it onto the big screen. In terms of us and how we're helping to unlock the potential in Europe, well, it kind of starts with the robust pipework. So we're able to offer buyers the types of pipework that they need. We collaborate quite closely with the DSPs, and we're able to offer the range, so a PG to an open market. We're also working with supply to pass more information and make that bid stream a lot more transparent. I'll probably go into that on the next questions, but I think there's a need for digital CTV buying to be a little bit closer and more transparent, similar to how linear is, in, did the ad serve, what content or what title, what genre did the ad serve against? That kind of stuff probably needs to be addressed at some stage. And as well as that, we're also educating the supply side on the benefits of technology such as header bidding and other things that will bring a sort of element of programmatic hygiene to the fore. And I think that's probably enough for me for now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Maria.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Mirasova. You almost got that.
Okay.
I'm a product at DCMN, and DCMN is a marketing partner for growing brands globally. So we work with clients like Deezer, Wooga, Vinted, and companies like that internationally. I'm leading a team that is responsible for bringing solutions for measurement and attribution cross-channel, and that channel, one of those being CTV. So for us as a buyer, CTV is quite different in the US comparing to how it is in Europe. So our observations are very much going down the same route as what you, Marianne, and John were describing what's going on in Europe, right, where we are facing similar challenges of having not enough scale, and the tools that are existing right now are, may not be the most optimal for each buyer just yet. In the US, because it has already scaled, and the volumes of inventory that we have access there through our partners is quite substantial, and in there CTV is working for us quite well. So we see significant uplift that CTV can bring when activated together with linear in the US. When we go in addressable, when we are thinking about doing or actually doing an audience extension story, that's already no longer I would say an innovation, but rather as one of the successful cases that we try to implement with more and more clients. In Europe, it's very much going towards what is the audience that our clients are looking for and whether we can even find them through CTV. You know what I mean? So obviously not one size fits all. We're not in that state of the market here just yet. So if it makes sense for our clients, especially when they're going after younger audiences, then we will be using CTV, and we are very happy in testing and activating new partners. And very soon, I think, as more publishers like Roku and Paramount Plus are activating their inventory this year, it will open more opportunities for us and other buyers to have even more successful cases in Europe.
Thank you so much. Reese.
Where to start? I guess ITV as a public service broadcaster in the UK has been all in on CTV for some period of time now. By the end of 2021, by viewing volume, 65% of all that over IP consumed content was happening in the CTV environment. And that's a combination of both VOD catch-up, box setting, and the consumption of streamed linear. So we have well-established beachhead in that space. And then what we announced last week with the pending arrival of ITVX is a real turbocharging of that strategy as we double down on our pivot and our transformation as a business to be a streaming first business with significant investment in both player tech and the content that will drive further consumption and audience penetration for us as a business. I think from an advertising perspective, we have already been utilizing the entirety of our CTV footprint for campaigns in Planet V across the course of the last 18 months. And we certainly anticipate with the arrival of ITVX that we'll be further diversifying the advertising products, the data, and the advertising opportunities that will exist within our CTV environment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Reese. So I'm going to go into a few questions right now. Maria, obviously you work with a number of marketers that are looking to reach their target customers in many different ways. How important is CTV now becoming to that decision-making process? And how do you see it evolving over the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, that's quite a great question. So again, going back to the different situations in US versus Europe. So in the US, it's already an instrument that we're using actively, and where we are trying to almost any new pitch that comes in to kind of guide the client that some portion of the budget should be allocated to CTV as well. So there, as I said, linear plus CTV is something that we do. For us in Europe, the budgets that we are mostly getting for CTV, those are still very much coming from digital rather than the linear, right? So for us, it's, and also to, second what Jaydev said about the tools and the measurement of how CTV is done right now. I think Jaydev, you brought a very good point that right now, when you compare the buying and the results of CTV versus linear, it's just in completely different workflow and completely different lingo. And so, I think it's very much similar to the experience that we have here, because it's not just about the execution and buying, but it's also about the internal education, and just selling it as a channel internally, I'd say, so within the next 3 years, besides having more inventory in Europe, in Germany, and other countries where we're quite active, I would say that it's, really important for us to see how the industry standards are going to be shifted, and what are if there are going to be any universal measurement solutions, and just, the standards that we can work off. So a variety of our products, are focused on measuring the the impact of a linear TV campaign that has on our clients' business goals. And right now, utilizing the same logic for CTV, that's interesting, but how can we build a stronger story here with CTV plus linear TV, right? Like, how can it be even a bigger cross-channel story where we as marketers can support our clients on the offline side in a universal manner? It doesn't matter the publishers and the broadcasters and how they work. So I would say that would be the ideal future for the next couple of years, to which I'm really looking forward to.
Well, that means we have to get some great insights from both Reese and Paul Good in that particular regard. So Reese, ITV is doing a fairly good job right now of packaging up linear and CTV. What explains your success and how you're doing it, and how can other broadcasters across Europe learn from what ITV is pioneering in the UK at this moment?
It's interesting, Mary, you say linear and CTV, because really they're the one and the same in many instances. If you choose to watch ITV live streamed content over IP in the CTV environment, then you are a linear viewer. And you are counted and measured and barred as such, the measurement body for the UK. I think what the real opportunity is, which we've been unlocking, is how we are able to augment the existing measurement structures, i.e. barb, with additional measures, whether that be C-Flight, which we've obviously announced and launched in the UK with our partners, Channel 4 and Sky, or proprietary first-party data sets that really enable us to go deep in unlocking the value of addressable audiences in this space, but still do it in a holistic way. Now, I was struck by what Paul said earlier in his opening comments around the need to, and if I may paraphrase, Paul, correct me if I've misattributed here, but we need to harmonise measurement and audience, the taxonomy around audience, and I think that's the thing that would be incumbent upon all of us to collaborate on. And I was also struck by how that was in the report that you've released today, Mary, that that there is a significant amount of work that we need to do collectively as an industry across territories to ensure that we are harmonising and creating consistent taxonomy around audience definitions and around the way that we are using technology and data formats, so that there's a consistent customer experience irrespective of their entry point into the ecosystem. Now, look, we have been, as the largest UK broadcaster, we have been, beneficiaries of just a sea change in consumer behaviour, as CTV devices have, predominantly been the main consumption device in the living room for some period of time. Our presence on those devices has, in part been both, like I said, a beneficiary, but also a facilitator of those changes in behaviour. And what we're doing in the commercial team here at ITV is ensuring that we are assessing that change, and that we are creating advertising products and advertising opportunities that enable our customers to best avail of them. And in doing that, what we're really mindful of is not trying to enforce the advertising structures and the advertising models of the past in what is a really modern and very progressive platform. I think it's Richard Tabakoala who says quite, very astutely, that the future for advertising won't fit in the containers of the past. And I think that's incumbent upon every broadcaster in the CTV ecosystem to really review that statement and understand how they're evolving their own journey and their own product development and the iterations of their propositions, so that we are really availing and capitalizing on opportunities that the CTV ecosystem provides to us, and starting to disentangle ourselves, decouple ourselves from some of the legacy models and some of the legacy operations, which will only inhibit innovation and progression as we move forward.
Which legacy models need to be addressed most?
I think there's certainly from a UK perspective, the way that television is traded, there are some challenges there that are unhelpful. There are some institutions there that need to be assailed. But I also think that, you're being really candid, that I don't think the entire measurement industry has been able to satisfactorily solve for what is a really diverse set of viewing norms now. And that diversity has created real disparity amongst the way that we've been able to measure, and all the panelists have kind of touched on that. So we're using, legacy, panel-based systems to measure what is a really fluid, dynamic, modern ecosystem. It's just, it's those containers of the past being, implemented on a future model that in and of themselves are restrictive.
Yeah.
We are very much in the process of looking, at ITV about developing and really investing in outcomes-based measurement models, because ultimately that's what customers and the clients want, right? Business outcomes. And we can measure reach and frequency as proxies for those. But in a CTV environment where everything's connected, where we've got identities that we can use, or common signals that we can use that can map into the other parts of the digital ecosystem, including purchase, then we really need to be leaning into those structures and understanding how we can best apply those models and those means to the CTV ecosystem.
So what kind of measurement capabilities are you using to get to that outcome space?
Look at the market, because of the way that the market hasn't necessarily caught up. Its impressions, its impacts, its reach, its frequency. Its effective CPMs, its cost per AEC, Q, whatever those metrics might be. It's some of the digital stuff kind of melded or kind of mashed together with some of the analog stuff. And really, I think we're at the point now where we can be much more innovative, much more progressive, and much bolder in our thinking about this, because the data exists, and it was also in Brian's presentation as well. Everybody, and I'd imagine most people on this panel and most people sitting on this call will be familiar with the clean room propositions which exist in the market now. We use InfoSum to a lot of broadcasters in the UK, where the intersection of data sets between a CTV publisher and an advertiser enables us to really close the gap between event and action, exposure and purchase, or exposure and action, however you want to define it. And these things should be really dynamic and should be happening in real time, and enabling us to be able to better present the channels in a way that is much more reflective and accurately reflective of what CTV is doing in terms of driving advertiser outcomes and advertiser awarenesses, versus the lag, which typically happens because we have to smush in some linear data, and then we have to overlay that with some, it's a real fruit salad in which somebody's throwing in some tomatoes because it is a fruit, right? Because they have to, and then that's a real mangled metaphor, but I think everybody knows what I'm driving at. Paul's chuckling, so I think he understands.
Okay, so Paul, how are you eliminating the fruit salad and maybe creating a Michelin star 2 meal?
Yeah, well, I mean, as I was, and apologies that my slides were not moving forward. Shouldn't move between screens. But yeah, I mean, the challenge is, as Reese was saying, that we're needing to move beyond those legacy containers, and that's not to say that panels don't remain fundamental as a source of truth in the way that we do measurement, but we need to move away from the panel being the source of exposure that drives reporting, just because as you move away from static advertising that's linked to the content to addressable and dynamic advertising, just the granularity and the variation is just beyond the capability of any panel. And therefore the panel should really be informing the bigger models that we can take that event level data that we're getting with high granularity and correct for any biases in the demographics that are coming from first party providers and resolve this issue between identifiers or devices and actual people. And then we can bring this into a holistic view that brings digital and TV together, because again, it behoves us not to create yet another silo of activity that's some subset of a subset of a subset, because what we're seeing from the advertisers is a fairly loud and consistent plea to please allow a unified view of this consumer behavior.
And how do you think things will, what are going to be the key things that need to happen on a measurement front over the next 3 years?
I think it is the availability of, and all the people who own CTV data and set-top box data, making that data available to the measurement currencies, so that that process that I was talking about of validation, normalization, and integration can take place. There is acceptance from the TV JICs of how we progress from the existing panel-based to more of a census-informed set of measurements, and an acceptance from the industry that there's going to be a break of trend, and that is inevitably a fear-inducing event, because there are always winners and losers. And when the numbers change, people get nervous, and there's just a process that we need to go through. But then there's also of a consistent way, and that was why I was talking about this virtual ID space. There were beautiful slides, by the way. Everything I said would have made complete sense if you'd seen them. So that's my excuse. But how we
know what? Can I say one thing though? If people do want the slides, people who are part of the webinar, you can send an email to me at mahalford at gmail.com. Again, that's mahalford at gmail.com, and I'll organize to get them sent.
Yeah, and the ID space, it needs to be, and while you can have dedicated ID spaces for the delivery that allow deterministic linking to first-party data sets, as Reese was talking about, from a measurement point where we're trying to get a holistic view of the market, we need to have an abstracted probabilistic ID space that all of these different models can fit into, so that we can then have a consistent reporting. And that also allows the reporting in of YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all those other pieces into a consistent whole. And that's really what the WFA, World Federation of Advertising framework is attempting to establish. And that's why we're running proof of concepts this year in the US with major advertisers, and bringing in large-scale TV data as well as data from digital publishers who are tagging and the digital platforms, so that we can prove this out.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So Jadev, you guys are creating solutions to help accelerate CTV. How do you see the environment evolving over the next 3 years?
Firstly, apologies. My dog snoring is now incrementally getting louder, and he'll probably start barking, asking for tea soon. Right. I guess to answer your question, if we kind of just step back and talk about a little bit more about Programmatic, for anybody who may not know, that might be a surprise actually. But at Programmatic, we recently updated our positioning statement, and whereas it's definitely important to mention that we don't really have skin in the buy side or the sell side, therefore can truly say that we are in fact an independent technology company whose approach is genuinely quite unbiased and agnostic. It's more important that what we want to do is actually create value to earn our own value, and we're kind of achieving that by creating the supply chain of the future. where we offer buyers better control and transparency and measurement. And now this is kind of, it'll be working outside of the broadcasters, so that kind of mid-tier mainly. But in order to achieve this, what we're doing now is we're working a lot more closely with the demand side. I think as an SSP, they didn't really speak to the buyers too much about 10, 15 years ago. However, things have changed, and what we're understanding from them is their needs and their situations are very different. So they differ by agency, by client, by DSP, and even the country that they're in. However, through that, we're able to enable solutions around transparency and measurement. And, you know, some would need pipe work such as PGs or PMPs as a marketplace offered to them. But through that, we're also able to educate the supply side. So utilizing tools like header bidding, as I mentioned earlier, but this is a tool that kind of benefits both sides. So in an auction, header bidding gives everybody a fair crack. And then in a header bidding auction, on the supply side, they can actually monetize. So we're kind of going into more of the weeds of programmatic here, but also allows us to then pass through transparency and bid stream parameters, which just bring into play the programmatic levels of hygiene, whereby a buyer centrally can control multiple, can kind of access multiple CTV publishers and control it centrally. So like if they want a report to see the content that they served on, or they want to do some kind of frequency capping at their end, they're able to do that. So it's us working closely with them, and by kind of working with them, it does allow us to better facilitate and ensure that we develop the right solutions for the right market in order for that market to grow. And over the coming years, I think no doubt there's going to be a lot more collaboration as things eventually scale and develop. And probably with that, they'll probably fall into some sort of open auction bidding. But an open marketplace in this industry will definitely democratize access to CTV media, which will give brands access to a wide variety of CTV publishers, because we are seeing more and more of those channels, you know, and we call them mid-tier, but they are quite household brands. You've got Rakuten, Samsung, LG, Pluto, etc. in play, and those guys will probably grow more. But it also allows for diversity of audiences. So advertisers are able to actually reach kind of like, they're able to reach more focused audiences as well as the expansive audiences, and effectively brands can reach new viewers on mid-size yet kind of premium channels, and often that will help to create a more relevant experience to the end user.
Thank you. That's great. Okay, so we need to move along here quickly. I just want to end the panel where I mentioned, you know, John at the end of his presentation talked about 4 priorities for the industry going forward. I wanted each panelist to tell me what you think is the #1 priority for unlocking the potential of CTV over the next 3 years. I'm going to go in order of on the chart here. So Paul, you're up first.
Unlocking the potential of CTV. Give us your data.
Okay. That's a great one. 3 words. Give it, no, 4. Give us your data. Love it. Okay. Jadev?
I feel like, where do I start?
Just one.
Probably say addressing the fragmentation. There's a lot of fragmentation in definitions. There's fragmentation in just technology. So it's addressing that and trying to make it a level playing field.
Okay, good. I like it. And I can distill that down to 2 words: addressing fragmentation. Okay, so Maria.
Okay, I'm going to be very short. More impressions, less fraud.
Oh, like that one. Very good. We're almost going to be able to create a rap out of this, I think. Okay, Reese.
Collaboration for standardization.
Great. I love it. This was terrific. Great conversation. Thank you all for participating today. We're now going to move on to our last panel of the day. And thank you again for all of you agreeing to be part of this panel. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Marianne. And thank you, everybody else. Now, I'm hoping we can welcome our next 3 panelists to our virtual stage. I think we should have Catty.
We have Catty and Daniel.
Welcome, Catty. Welcome, Daniel. And I'm going to start with you two, just while we try to, I think Marianne is hopefully going to try and resolve Vincent's technical problems. So welcome, Daniel and Catty. Our theme for our panel is really industry collaboration. CTVs, as we note in our report, are very much a meeting point for two previously relatively separate ecosystems, a TV advertising ecosystem and a digital or online video advertising ecosystem. And their convergence on TV screens across Europe creates tremendous opportunities, but also some interesting challenges. And we're really delighted to have representatives of three trade bodies at the forefront of driving progress and change in these ecosystems to talk a bit about where collaboration might get us. So to get the ball rolling, I'm going to ask my good friend Catty from EGTA just to give us her sense of where the TV industry, the commercial broadcasting industry, has got to in dealing with CTV advertising ecosystem. It's a big, broad question, but if you had to summarize it briefly in a couple of minutes, how are our commercial broadcasters addressing the CTV opportunity in your view? What's the kind of broad headlines you would emphasize?
Okay. Yep. First, thank you for inviting us. For those who don't know, so EGTA is the trade body of advertising sales houses for TV and radio across Europe, with about 160 members now across 42 markets. So when it comes to being a trade body and cooperation, this is clearly the key word at EGTA. As disappointing as it may be, we're based in Europe, and I guess the word that is being discussed is more addressable TV than connected TV per se, because this is probably the facet in connected TV that triggers the most interest. Now, if I have to say those lines of activities where progress has been made or where the toughest discussions are happening, I would say there are three. There's three big trends in the membership. One is all efforts that can come under the umbrella of simplification and unification. So definitely making the TV inventory more accessible across all platforms and developing the technology that will simplify buys for the buy side and making it just more united so that people can buy across inventories is definitely one part that has kept all of our members busy. Measurement has been a huge topic for all members. We've heard from the previous panel the need to integrate more sources of data to move away from just panel measurement to something that encompasses panel, but also census data, and depending on where you sit, ACR data, smart TV data, and so on. And integrating that and learning that you can live and trade in a world where there is more than one currency, where you don't just need to measure audiences, but also outcome, impact, and so on and so forth. And then the last one would be, as I said at the beginning, just everything that has to do with personalization, targeting, and addressability, and making new format, offering new things, new way of leveraging data, working with advertisers on how we unify their data, our data, and developing new formats on the back of that. If I have one downside to all of those things, I mean, they've all been happening simultaneously. What I'm seeing, however, from my perspective, is lots of, if not isolated, at best national efforts, but where the big chunk of efforts need to come now is to bring all these efforts. There's been lots and lots of learnings along the way from many different initiatives. We need now to find the way to unify that, at least to some extent, so that they can benefit the industry at large.
And I guess, Catty, you're members of this incredibly diverse cross-section of the industry. And I guess one factor they grapple with is that the CTV market is incredibly different in every geography they operate in. We were struck by how broadcasters like Mediaset and ProSieben and RTL have really lent into HbbTV, and you see some really exciting innovations in that space, which Oliver mentioned. But I suspect Reset ITV in the UK spends no time thinking about HbbTV. It's a very different approach, and that makes it hard to standardize.
Yeah, and your study was over 5 markets that are particularly well developed and that are quite advanced. Take all the other ones, and then you'll understand that it's those discussions are hard to get. And yes, they are, and there will be, I think, different models. But if we can bring it down to a plenitude of models to just a few, that would be already a great step, I think, if you ask me. But yes, the diversity is huge.
Let's move on to my friend and colleague, Daniel Knapp. Daniel, welcome. Now, Daniel, you've spoken at a number of really excellent IAB Europe events recently, talking about the IAB side of the CTV landscape, the kind of digital video businesses, the streamers, the programmatic ecosystem. Give us your sense of where you think this market is at the moment, from the IAB's work. How would you describe the current landscape?
Well, absolutely. And at the IAB, similar to ECTA with this vast volume of broadcasters in there, we represent a lot of different stakeholders. We have also the broadcasters in there. We have digitally native streaming services. We have hardware providers eyeing the CTV world and leading there. We got measurement providers, and we also got the entire programmatic ecosystem in there. And we find that typically with not just with CTV, but with all markets that grow kind of in a bottom-up way, that there comes a stage where everyone realizes that they have been kind of cooking their own meal and suddenly realize they need to collaborate very quickly. And what I'm going to say today is not the official IAB position. I work at the IAB as an independent economist, but also that also allows me to share some insight and numbers on where I believe this current CTV ecosystem is currently sitting. First off, I think the term ecosystem is a misnomer, as it suggests something works symbiotically and there is a mutual support between the different constituents. I think we are in fragmented systems where some players are simultaneously in the future and in the past. So if I look at the European market, there has been a massive tension between PR and practice. In particular, US-driven press releases that try to superimpose the inevitability of fast growth of CTV on a very, very fragmented European market landscape. And there remains a massive gulf between what's promised in press releases and what the practice actually is. If we factor out YouTube, and we all know CTV has very different definitions. If we factor out YouTube and think of, well, smart TV apps, BVOD services on connected devices and others, the market in Europe is probably shy of 1.5 billion euros. And if you ask some leading broadcasters in Europe that have been traditionally very heavy on CTV, on HbbTV, and ask them, well, what's happening outside of the HbbTV world? They'd say, well, maybe we're making 50 or 80 million euros on that other bit of CTV. So it's an incredibly nascent market. However, progress has been fast and has been ramping up, predominantly by the apparent need really to collaborate and to ensure that it's a European ecosystem, i.e. one controlled and managed by European companies. So we've seen a lot of innovation on the sales side. If we look at D4s and other collaborations in Germany, we're seeing regulators realizing that they cannot maintain their traditional kind of media market control models, where once you exceed a certain amount of audience share, you're not allowed to do M&A or to work together, which has hampered, again, in Germany, but also in the UK and other markets, collaboration in the past. So that's kind of falling away. But we're seeing also, I think, a battle of control about data and its interpretation between broadcasters and other providers of inventory and eyeballs and the agencies and the buy side, where some players on the sell side have historically provided their own source of truth. And now, and you've heard it on other panels, agencies on the buy side, they want a unified measurement, and that would mean for the sell side ceding control. So I think there's this battle of control. And I think lastly, I think there are still a lot of kind of very technical hurdles, which have less to do with advertising, but with CTV overall. So speaking to a CTV kind of app developer recently, they shared the painful process of getting the app approved on different types of TV sets with different chipsets. The testing chipsets are different from chipsets in the wild. So there's a lot of fragmentation on there. And I think in a sense, the notion if you build your own software, you should build your own hardware kind of rings true. And as that's not the case, I think we're going to see kind of continued fragmentation, not just on the ad side, but even on the content or, no, that's in a sense, content or platform ecosystem development side.
Daniel, thank you for those comments. Well, you mentioned hardware, so I'm delighted, I hope now, to introduce Vincent Grivet. Vincent, are you with us?
Sadly, John, I haven't been able to get him on. I've been working hard to do it, but it's just not working.
Not to worry. It's a sign of the times that as we try to roll out standards for CTV, we can't get him onto a Zoom call, but not to worry. We will power on. So, Cathy, Daniel talked a bit about this fragmented ecosystem. When we look at the commercial broadcasting industry, obviously the industry has decades of rulemaking over the many years in many geographies. You know, we're closing in on 100 years of commercial broadcasting in many European markets, or broadcasting at any rate. And there are rules and business processes and workflows that have been developed over long periods of time that cover everything from the compliance of adverts to ad clash rules and so on. Do you think we need to do more to try and align the digital ecosystem with the TV rules, or the TV side with digital, or to build some completely new rules so that advertisers are clear about how this market works and that rules that should pertain carry over? Or do we need to start with a fresh piece of paper, a fresh set of eyes and a blank sheet of paper?
One question to you, when you say rules, are you talking legal rules, or are you talking about work processes? Not just legal rules, right?
I'm talking about the rules that govern the delivery of advertising in TV environments. So rules about compliance and regulation, about reporting, metadata standards, ad clash rules, these sorts of things.
I mean, in terms of rules, I guess that the difficulty at the moment is that broadcasters would talk to you a lot about the need for level playing field. They would want, obviously, some of the platforms to be more regulated than they are at the moment, because that would bring some kind of fairness. But in asking for additional rules, they put themselves in danger, because they too have their own online activities which they are aiming at developing. And of course, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot and then be hampered in what you can do. So the call for additional rules is always a very tricky thing. The call for a level playing field, of course, is something that people would want to have. And I guess a lot of discussions are ongoing. It's definitely not my field of specialization, so I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of the digital single act and all these things. But I mean, regulations are needed to some extent. Level playing field is needed. There's no need for too many additional rules, would be my point of view. Now, when it comes to other fields like how we deal with data, how we deal with inventory, how we deal with automation, how we deal with all of this, yes, new working methods need to be invented. I think there still is a big fear of losing on the broadcaster side, because it's been premium inventory. As we said, we've had the so-called golden standard when it comes to measurement for so many years. The fear of losing out is huge, but the realization that we're no longer in the same world we were, if only, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years ago, that also is a realization that we can't just stick to what we had. So that's definitely a given. How we move forward is still very, very much, there's still lots of hesitation on how far we go. So automation is happening. What I'm witnessing at the moment is lots of automation being decided per company or on a per company basis. Right. Take the exception of HbbTV, and that's where that can't go on like that. I mean, of course, there's lots of trial and errors that are being made, lots of technologies being tested, but we're going to have to align on data segmentation, data identification, technology and what it's used for, what functionalities we develop for buyers, for agencies, for advertisers, just some form of an alignment that bring things into perspective. So I think there's lots of pioneering work being done by the different TV companies, lots of progress, and that is being split. That's one of the roles of ECTA, taking the knowledge that comes from, let's say, the Planet V, take from 1PTV in France, from all those things, and all those initiatives, and trying to learn what works, what doesn't, what brings new opportunities, and why there's no reason to be fearful when you do things in a certain way, and spread that knowledge as widely as possible. So scaling the likes of HbbTV for those markets that are willing to invest in that technology is one thing. Trying to take the lessons from the other markets and seeing if there are some business rules, some business practices that can be applied across markets for the benefit of all, and sharing also quite widely and as widely as possible the fact that you can all grow and there's money to be made if you are willing to abandon some of the things that you used to master that used to be done in a certain way by applying technology to the benefit of all players in the industry.
One other question, Cathy, before we move back to Daniel. One of the really encouraging signs, I think, of the last 6 months has been this real growth in collaboration between the broadcasters and some of the TV manufacturers in different geographies. So here in the UK, for example, we're seeing ITV now partnering to roll out dedicated CTV channels. We've got collaboration between RTL and OEMs to roll out the HBB TA spec. Are you confident we'll see more of these partnerships, which will support the ecosystem going forwards?
I think there has to be. At the moment, it's happening in the largest markets, but as always, I mean, that knowledge and those agreements will trickle down and have an impact on the entire European market. So I'm expecting that there will be more collaborations. We always look to the UK, to Germany, Italy and Spain, as you've said many times so far, have played a big role, definitely in this sector. So the eyes are on the bigger markets and those will trickle down. And once the agreement are passed by those markets, they will definitely have an impact on other markets as well. And they need to continue for sure.
Agreed. So Daniel, the programmatic ecosystem is obviously one of the kind of big topics, and we heard from Programmatic, earlier. One thing that came back from us very, very strongly during our research is that most major broadcasters are very cautious about making their inventory available within major programmatic platforms. They have their own independent programmatic strategies. And when you talk to recent ITV, they're making tremendous strides in that space, but it's separate from the Trade Desk and the Pubmatics and the Magnites of this world. Do you think that matters?
I think it matters now.
Are they missing an opportunity, I guess? Or actually, are there good reasons for maintaining that separation?
I think we need to first understand that not only is the definition of CTV fraught with problems, but also the definition of programmatic. And in contrast to CTV, which is kind of a blank sheet of paper, programmatic comes with a big legacy, and that legacy isn't always positive. If we look back at the evolution of programmatic, we've seen a fraud, we've seen the rise of audience-based buying, which has undermined the value of the editorial environment, etc. But this is really Programmatic 101. However, it's casting a long shadow still on how the programmatic world operates. At IAB Europe, we conduct regular surveys called Attitudes to Programmatic, and we speak with media buyers, with broadcasters and other suppliers of inventory, ad tech, and everybody else who's in the middle. And consistently, CTV is being identified as the largest next opportunity for programmatic. However, in actual terms, the money spent is still, as you say, John, incredibly small. Now, I think if we want to understand the potential of programmatic and how some of these reservations that, in particular, that has can be overcome, we need to understand that programmatic is changing rapidly. Many of you will recall the kind of pioneering work of the PwC and ISBA in the UK, where they mapped out, it was in the open programmatic display-centric world, this very, very complex supply chain of many different actors involved, where money was being missed in the middle and so forth. I've conducted similar analysis for a range of publishers. That's a hugely problematic world in programmatic. But look at recent announcements. Look at what the Trade Desk said, launching Open Path, i.e. a direct way from the advertiser and via Trade Desk to access publisher inventory. Look at collaborations between a Group M and a Magnet and a Pubmatic, for instance, where agencies and SSPs realize that the current economics of programmatic don't really work. There needs to be a compression of the supply chain, a simplification and a compression. And what some broadcasters are doing themselves programmatically in this open programmatic world, I believe it will converge as we are moving more towards one-to-one supply chains anyways in the programmatic world. This raises huge competitive questions, in particular for intermediaries. So who's in control of that chain? But we're moving away from this spaghetti soup of supply chains, and that will, I think, inevitably bring the broadcaster-led approaches, its proprietary approaches, and the programmatic world together. One last thing that needs to happen in CTV is less of an issue in Europe, which is more of a kind of supply and a sell-side driven market than in the US, are issues around fraud and brand safety. So currently, when you buy programmatically, it's often not clear what are you actually buying. Is this actually broadcaster inventory, or what app are you buying, etc. So here we got IAB Tech Lab standards, but which are, you describe it, rolled out not systematically across different countries. But I think what also needs to happen, we need faster TVs. And that was something that I learned only recently, that when you run brand safety checks, for instance, on programmatically bought inventory, the brand safety check might take longer than the auction process, i.e. it could only happen after the fact. And we're dealing in part in this very, very vast kind of OEM landscape with slow hardware, which is currently hampering the adoption of the checks and balances that a programmatic world needs. And last sentence on programmatic. I don't think we will arrive at a situation anytime soon in Europe where we will have an auction-based marketplace as programmatic TV as the default, but it will be more direct deals and more about the data-driven and algorithmic pipes that programmatic enables rather than the open marketplace.
I think you make a great point. And to me, it goes back to one of the huge differences between the US market and most European markets. The US has a group of scale streamers who picked up significant audiences. It's about 25% of volume, according to the latest Nielsen data. Questions there may be about that data. And many of those streamers are independent companies who, many have been acquired now, but when they look to monetize, it's very cost effective for them to develop relationships with DSPs, which plugs them straight into agencies. But if you talk to ITV is sold out. It doesn't have, most broadcasters we've spoken to have been very clear that they're happy to make inventory available and to work with partners if there's a clear business benefit and a transparent set of business rules, and they can see how they're going to benefit. And I think at this point, that isn't really clear. Marianne, I think we're still Vincentless. Is that right? We've had to give out.
Vincentless.
He's just there.
Is he?
Just arrived. Yeah, he just arrived.
Oh my goodness, Vincent, welcome.
I'm a survival of fragmentation in the video conferencing system. Maybe HBBTV should take care and publish a standard for conference systems.
Yeah, I agree. If we could, you've been on WebEx all this time, no doubt, trying to figure out why it's not worked. Vincent, so we're running terribly short of time, but so delighted you could join us. Vincent, you probably, I don't know how much of the conversation you've heard, but we've been talking about some of the progress that collaboration is delivering. And obviously HBBTV is a standout example of what collaboration in Europe can deliver. It's making tremendous strides. Can you give us a few thoughts on where the advertising component and specifications have got to? Because we're seeing some really encouraging developments in that space, for example, with HBBTV TA in Germany.
Absolutely. Sorry to everybody to have taken so long to join. Next time I'll try to do that in a better way. Indeed, I think HBBTV is likely to play a key role in the emergence of targeted advertising in TV. It's probably not at scale yet, but there is a lot of ongoing work to bring it at scale. But I think nothing else is at scale, and probably HBBTV is still the most promising road to reach scale in targeted advertising TV in Europe, because it's the only way, at least to my knowledge, to remove the challenges of fragmentation. In practical terms, it's a very long journey, which I had the pleasure to do from the beginning. Preparing this webinar, I look at my notes, and actually it started 5 years ago, 2017. So that seems to be a huge amount of time, but it started by a so-called study mission within DVB at that time. And at that time, to tell you the truth, most people thought that having ever targeted advertising in broadcast TV would be crazy and would never happen. Luckily, we could prove otherwise, that yes, it may happen and it will happen. So as you probably know, there have been two very important technical specifications developed. One in HBBTV, which basically says how a TV receiver should be organized to be capable of doing good targeted advertising. That means seamless. And the other specification in DVB, which is called DVB-TA, is advising or organizing how the advertising should be signaled in the broadcast stream. So these two things are really absolutely essential. So I would say that on paper, in terms of the specification, everything is there. Specifications have been published, they've been tested, they've been implemented. One important thing, I don't know if we have TV manufacturers in the audience, but of course, TV manufacturers like standards, but they also like standards that they can implement. And for manufacturers to be able to implement standards, they need to be able to test. And the interesting thing is that HBBTV has developed and now made available about 250 new tests in a total size of the suite test, which is about 3,000, which are dedicated to targeted advertising. So it's an implementable proposition, if you will. Now, having said that, it's not at scale. One of the reasons that it's not at scale is probably because a number of TV manufacturers are still considering whether they will or not implement HBBTV TA. And one of the reasons for them to potentially hesitate is that some of them would like that there is an economic reward for them to do so. And that economic reward, to my knowledge in the past, has been negotiated on a one-on-one basis, and probably that is not a scalable system. There are maybe 9 or 10 or 12 relevant TV manufacturers active in Europe. There are probably 50 relevant broadcasters in Europe who can consider to run targeted advertising. If you have 50 times 12 one-on-one contracts to exist and to manage with all the operational details, that just doesn't work. So probably there is a need for some kind of mediation hub to be created and to exist, so that all manufacturers will look like one to the broadcasters, and all broadcasters will look like one to the manufacturers. And when this is achieved, certainly broadcast-based targeted advertising will flourish, because it is not only an opportunity, I think it's a necessity for the broadcast industry.
I mean, Vincent, you make a great point. And for me, it was one of the most interesting things that came out of our research, both a set of very positive responses to the HBBTV TA spec, which, as you say, will progress and develop over time, but requires some sort of commercial negotiation between a manufacturer and a broadcaster or a set of broadcasters. But there isn't really a body that can facilitate that at the moment. We were surprised. I think the Digital Europe group, which brings together lots of the manufacturers, published a statement or manifesto about their policy towards these arrangements. But we were surprised that when we spoke to European broadcasters, many of them had never come across the statement or heard of it. So there's a need, we felt, and we mentioned this in the report, for perhaps some sort of forum that can just bring together the relevant bodies to at least have a negotiation, so all sides are aware of the respective positions, the problems can be identified and clearly diagnosed, and potential solutions can be discussed and agreed upon more seamlessly than they are. This takes us on to our final question, as we're running very short of time. So I just wanted to ask each of you, similar to Marianne's question, to closing question to her panel, give us a moment. What do you see as the priorities for collaboration? Given the opportunities you see, where would you like to see more dialogue and discussion to secure the kind of collaboration across the value chain, across, it may be a misnomer, but I haven't got a better word, the ecosystem in the CTV space, to really help drive the market forward during the next few years? Catty, who should be talking to who, in your view? Do you have a sense? What would you prioritize?
I think all the players you mentioned should be around the table. The thing that will make people come to the table if they see a reason to come to the table. And as I think I read in some parts of the report, and as some people have said, at the moment, broadcasters are feeling that they make the most of whatever they want to do at this moment with CTV and with Addressable. And they don't necessarily see the need or the reasons why they would give up on some of their autonomy or some of their revenues, or just to be part of a system where some of the money will, as we have all read, some of the money will go to the chain, the ad tech chain and so on. So they don't necessarily all see the need or the reason why they would join the table. But if they do, then I think the priorities would be in solving some of the issues around measurement, at the minimum, the definitions, the IDs. I think we need to find That's my personal conviction in this case, and not ECTA's, but I think we need to find a way to end up with a TV number across platforms, and definitely a platform numbers, and at least those two numbers can start talking to each other. I don't see it as happening anytime soon that we'll find one number, one pipeline, one system that will make everybody happy. But at least in the as a first step, aligning on measurement is definitely a place to start.
Here. Daniel? Priorities for collaboration. What would you focus on?
I mean, Katie has covered the value chain. I think what's equally important is that this is not just national collaboration, but it's a European collaboration. Number one, across the value chain, but also for different broadcasters. We are already moving into a world where 2 or 3 broadcasters per market is going to be long-term too small. We need to scale across Europe. We also need to ensure that we are not duplicating or quadrupling innovations, but that we are sharing them to ensure that Europe as a region with its homegrown media ecosystem can actually continue to thrive. And lastly, I think there needs to be more collaboration with advertisers. One thing that we often overlook is we shouldn't recreate the world of television in the connected world by assuming that it's going to be the same structure of advertisers and the same distribution of spend that we have known for the last 50 years. Indeed, one of the biggest things we're looking at IAB Europe is the rise of retail media, for instance, or the rise of digitally endemic brands. They are now at a stage where they need to do more than sales in a direct sales-driven advertising. They want to move up the funnel, and they want to buy television as well, but quite differently than the P&Gs of the world. They want to have it in one single platform, one programmatic and an omni-channel platform. And their share of TV might never be 40 or 50 or 60% of overall budgets, but quite different. And they need metrics and buying systems that allow them to do that in their way, often with much younger CMOs, much more data-driven. So we need to collaborate with that part of the world, those who will actually long-term fund this ecosystem to ensure that we have tools and systems available that suit their needs.
Here, well said, sir. Vincent, a final word from you. I suspect you may already have answered the question, what do you see as the priorities for collaboration, but any final remarks on how to move the market forward in terms of partnerships and collaborations?
Yeah, I think what I said a moment ago was probably the number one challenge as I see it, and I'm not going to repeat that. Hopefully it could be clear to everybody, and I really hope that this will happen. I believe the number 2 challenge behind this first one will be to create homogeneous workflows between the broadcast targeted advertising and the other targeted advertising, because I believe I'm not an advertising person, but I have spoken to many advertising persons, and I understand that increasingly the advertising companies, they want to aggregate and smartly mix the different inventories. They want a little bit of TV, a little bit of OTT, a little bit of radio, etc. And probably this goal is not sustainable if you don't have a single type of workflow to manage all these inventories. And right now, maybe every inventory has its own trading habits, and probably there is a need to recombine and converse that a little bit.
And I think, Vincent, you and I are talking to the same advertisers. Very much what we heard, and I think is what everybody wants. Folks, thank you so much for your contributions to this panel. There is still clearly more work to be done, and we very much hope this report can make some contribution. We will, I think myself and Marianne and the various partners to the project, be looking to see if there is an appetite to create some sort of forum to have at least a discussion about these collaboration opportunities. And we will reach out to everyone here today to see whether there's an appetite for some sort of roundtable to at least get that ball rolling. But in the meantime, a massive thank you to, first of all, our 3 fantastic sponsoring partners, Roku, ThinkOn's Group, and IP on Web. A massive thank you to my friend and colleague, Marianne Halford, who has worked tirelessly side by side as a real partnership to make this happen. And a huge thank you to the extraordinary number of executives who contributed quotes, comments, feedback, and input to the report. We hope it's a good read, or at least a semi-interesting one. And we look forward to continuing the discussions. Marianne, over to you.
Yes, thank you, everyone, and thank you, John. We will be organizing for everybody who has participated in today's webinar to be able to get a link to download the report. If people want slides, please let us know. We'll be happy to, actually, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to send the slides along with the report to everybody who registered today. So we'll get that taken care of. And then one last thing, you know, we're here in the United States. We know that there's a lot going on in Europe right now, and everybody in Europe is in our thoughts and prayers, and hoping that there'll be a resolution to the situation in Ukraine in the near future. So but thank you, everyone, today for your great participation, and we look forward to continuing the dialogue. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.